I'm one of those few politicians left, if maybe the only one other than Ellison and one or two others, who knew him personally very well. From the summer of 1967 until about 1975, I knew George as well as I knew anyone in politics. For 3 years, I worked directly with him. I went to his house, home, bungalow, in Clegedwith the 7th Drive in the Heath for 2 or 3 Sundays every quarter, because he was the Secretary of State for Wales and I was the Research and Public Relations Officer for the Labour Party in Wales. Now, when I first met him, and that would have been, oddly enough, about 50 years August time, as distant as that looked, I quite enjoyed his company because at that time we had a common enemy, sorry to say, David, which was Plaid Cymru and especially Gwynoro Evans.
What's wrong with that?
He hated Gwynoro Evans. You know, he hated Gwynoro Evans. And we worked closely together. I would go to his home and he would give me papers from the Welsh office, not secret ones, so that I could use them as the basis to send out to the constituencies in Wales, and from that, letters to the papers, articles, etc., etc., etc. First time I went to his house, go into the lounge. On the left-hand side, a large photo of the Queen by the book. On the right-hand side, Prince Charles, which was amazing. You know, I thought I was walking into Buckingham Palace. But the problem is with George, you see, if he had been a Welsh speaker, he would have been a nationalist. Make no mistake about it. He resented the language because he couldn't speak it. That was his problem. And he resented so many things about the crypto-nationalists. You know, there were about 8 or 9 of us who he detested. There's a story a listener once told me that in the Travellers Club in London, they'd gone back, say, about 1971, at the time of the Brexit, EEC referendum, and all that time. And they'd gone there to have a private chat about a booklet they were doing. And lo and behold, who arrived but George? Ah, boys, what you doing here then? Plotting, is it? That's how he was, suspicious and afraid. I don't want to say too much. What my preface says is true. There is nothing in that preface which is a lie, which is an exaggeration, possibly the one about no principle, because he might have had a little principle, like all of us, I suspect. But the gist of what I say, none of it is an exaggeration, none of it is a lie. I know because I was there. And for many a year I worked closely with him, and we were close for 2 years until I was made the chair of a working party to prepare the Labour Party's evidence in Wales to the Kilbrandon-Crowther Commission. And part of the working party was Alan Michael, Paul Flynn, Gareth Howell, the son of the former Lynn Howell from the Wales Tourist Board, Bruce George, who later became a Member of Parliament in the Midlands somewhere, and we, of course, Wyn Thomas from Swansea Sound, Fame, and all those sort of people. And we moved closely and closely and closely towards an elected council for Wales, which was the forerunner, actually, to the First Assembly. The powers the First Assembly had was clearly the main issues, the main suggestions that Emrys Jones, Wyn Morgan, the Welsh Labour Party at the time, presented in his evidence to the Crowther Commission. And that finished me with George. Because whereas he thought I was one of his friends, I now became, personally, a big enemy. I didn't detest George. George was rather good and nice to get on with. You could enjoy George's company.
But could you trust him?
No. Couldn't trust George at all. Because at the end of the day, you knew all the time that he was not plotting, but always manoeuvring. He was a terrible gossip. I know all politicians gossip. Let's not say politicians don't gossip. I don't know what they do these days. I've been out of politics for 20 years. Maybe they gossip more these days, I don't know. But back then, he was a terrible gossip. And the moment he could find out something about someone, he was merciless. And he hated Cledwyn Hughes with a vengeance. Hated him. I remember an occasion, I think it's in the book, we were sitting down round the Welsh table, and of course George would hold forth. And he was saying, did you hear Cledwyn last night? He said, did you hear Cledwyn last night? Wasn't he terrible? Terrible. On about the language and on about devolution. And in the tea room of the House of Commons, I could see Cledwyn coming from about 20, 30 yards away. And I kept quiet. And George sensed there was something happening. Because about 5 yards from him now, Cledwyn was there. Oh, Cledwyn Bach, he said, come here and sit with us. I was just telling the boys what a marvellous speech you did last night. You know, that was George. I could go on and on and on. I do not wish to do that. But he caused havoc to the Welsh Labour Party, pure havoc. His articles in the Liverpool Daily Post, his vitriol against the Welsh language, the nationalist element, devolution, Welsh speakers, Welsh-speaking Labour MPs, it was vitriolic. And in fact, Tom Ellis and I, which is true, went to see Harold Wilson. I was quite close to Harold Wilson, by the way, for about 7 years. Because being the public relations officer of the Labour Party, I had spoken many times with Harold, I had seen him many, many times, and we went to see around end of 1973, something like that, and said to Harold, look, if you don't do something about George, we are going to lose these seats. And true enough, February 74, it happened. Gwynoro, Sir Vaughan, Meirionydd, it happened. And what did Harold do a bit late in the day? He shoved George on one side and made John Morris Secretary of State for Wales. He realised then the mistake, and many of us had told Harold more than once, change him as shadow spokesman in the 72-73 period. Get rid of him then. But you see, George was what we used to call Harold's ENT. That was the nickname behind his back. Ears, nose and throat. Whatever he picked up, he'd pass it to Harold. Whatever Harold wanted to convey to us, it would come through George. Those of us who were devolutionists had no much time for him, and he had no much time for us either. That's the honest truth. We disliked George as much as George disliked us. Let's be straightforward about it. But there were not many, even of the anti-devolutionists, who liked George. I don't remember Neil Kinnock, Alan Williams, Swansea West, and many others. I don't remember them befriending George at all. Not at all. He didn't have many friends inside the Welsh Labour Party, other than one, Barry Jones, North Wales, who behind the scenes we used to refer to as George's parliamentary son, because they were inseparable. Look, I could go on and on and on, but I tell you, this book is not an exaggeration. My preface is not an exaggeration, and many, many things in that book deserve to be told, because he lived a lie about many things. He lived a lie about his Christianity. Terrible. You know, I don't understand how he was. Look, I don't want to take over here. You've done very well. I'm going to